What Grenada just did to Donald Trump left U.S. officials scrambling, and it's sending shockwaves through the Caribbean and Washington. Just weeks after Trump's administration doubled down on travel restrictions and deportations, Grenada made a move no one expected. They didn't protest, they outmaneuvered. They passed bold legislation, rallied Caribbean unity, and fired back with diplomatic precision. What they've done could change how small nations deal with superpowers. So what exactly happened? Why now? And how might this change your ability to travel, study, or invest abroad? Buckle up, because this is about more than Grenada. This is about a global power shift. On June 29, 2025, Grenada's parliament made headlines by unanimously passing the Caribbean Sovereignty and Mobility Act, a bold legislative package directly aimed at countering Donald Trump's Executive Order 14195, which targeted Caribbean nations with harsh new travel restrictions. This act is not just symbolic. It's the most sweeping diplomatic and migration reform Grenada has ever passed, and it sends a powerful message to Washington. We're not going to be intimidated. Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, addressing the nation just hours after the vote, said, "For too long, Grenada and our neighbors have been treated as stepping stones, not partners. This act affirms our right to protect our citizens, our dignity, and our future." The bill comes in response to a series of Trump-era moves that many Caribbean leaders view as discriminatory and retaliatory. Trump's executive order expanded biometric pre-clearance, labeling Grenadian travelers as higher risk. It slashed visa durations from 10 years to 2 for Grenadian passport holders, and it imposed new fees and travel limits on Caribbean nationals entering through major U.S. airports. What Grenada did next was unexpected. Instead of pleading for exemptions, Grenada proposed a Grenada-Africa Travel Accord, offering visa-free access for students and entrepreneurs between Grenada, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. Announced a Caribbean Mobility Task Force working with Antigua, Barbados, and St. Lucia to negotiate regional visa waivers with the EU and South America. Launched a digital citizenship ID program, allowing Grenadians abroad to access government services, even if blacklisted from U.S. systems. Imposed a diplomatic review clause, stating that U.S. diplomatic immunity in Grenada would be paused unless consular fairness improves. Called for a CARICOM-wide summit to revise all Caribbean U.S. migration agreements. International response was swift. Reuters reported that Grenada may have just set the tone for the Caribbean's diplomatic future. The move also trended on Twitter across the diaspora with hashtags like #GrenadaStans and #CaribbeanNotColonies. Grenada's decision didn't come out of the blue. It's been building for months, and it reflects both political necessity and growing frustration with U.S. policy under Donald Trump's second administration. By early 2025, visa rejection rates for Grenadian citizens had skyrocketed to 42%, according to leaked figures from regional consular offices. These weren't just casual travelers. Students, medical tourists, and even government officials reported increased scrutiny, delayed interviews, and unexplained denials. The problem was especially infuriating for Grenadians who hold dual citizenship under the country's Citizenship by Investment program. Under Trump's policy revision, CBI holders were automatically flagged for enhanced background screening, regardless of their visa history. The result? Ordinary citizens were being punished for decisions made at the policy level. Grenada's tourism and export industries also started to feel the heat. Trump's biometric mandates came with infrastructure costs Grenada couldn't afford. U.S. carriers threatened to reduce flights to Maurice Bishop International Airport unless the government upgraded to U.S.-compliant surveillance systems. And in May, the U.S. Embassy in Barbados issued a warning advising Americans to exercise increased caution when traveling to Grenada, citing infrastructural deficiencies, a move Grenadian officials saw as a thinly veiled economic threat. At home, Grenadian leaders saw a rare window: bipartisan support for standing up to Washington. Opposition leader Tobias Clement, typically critical of Prime Minister Mitchell, stated, "This is not about party politics. This is about sovereignty. We can no longer allow Washington to set the terms of how Grenadians travel, trade, or live." Surveys showed that 74% of Grenadians supported retaliatory diplomatic action, even if it meant visa delays or aid freezes. Grenada has also taken cues from Barbados, Jamaica, and St. Lucia, which have each challenged Trump-era restrictions through regional alliances and bilateral deals. By June, it became clear, if Grenada didn't act, it risked becoming a testing ground for future restrictions. That urgency sparked boldness, and the boldness triggered the act that stunned the world. The heart of the backlash lies in Executive Order 14195, signed by Donald Trump in March 2025. The order, titled Restoring Integrity to the U.S. Entry System, was framed as a security measure, but critics across the Caribbean say it targets small island nations in ways that are discriminatory, excessive, and economically harmful. EO 14195 introduced a tiered system that groups countries into three categories. Tier 1, low-risk nations like UK, Australia, Japan. Tier 2, intermediate oversight like Mexico, India. Tier 3, nations of concern, including Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, and Suriname. Tier 3 nations must now comply with full biometric pre-clearance with facial recognition and fingerprint scans, interagency visa screening between DHS, ICE, and the Treasury Department, in-flight data tracking from airlines, and pre-approval for U.S. entry. Grenadian officials say this effectively criminalizes travel from Caribbean nations, treating tourists and students like security threats. EO 14195 slashed visa durations for Tier 3 nations. Visitor visas dropped from 10 years to 2. Student visas dropped from 5 years to 1. Business and work visas now require a second interview within 12 months. The order also gives consular officials expanded discretion to deny visas based on aggregate national trends, a clause Grenada and CARICOM leaders say allows racial or geopolitical profiling. The order demands that all international airports in Tier 3 countries upgrade to U.S. security standards, including real-time video sharing and digital forensics capabilities. The cost? Borne entirely by the local governments. For Grenada, the estimated cost is $28 million USD, or 6% of the national budget. Human rights groups have called EO 14195 a neo-colonial overreach. The Caribbean Diaspora Alliance issued a statement saying, "This order doesn't protect the U.S., it punishes those least able to push back." Grenada, unlike others, decided not to wait for change. It crafted its own. Rather than rely on appeals or empty condemnations, Grenada has decided to build its own diplomatic and mobility infrastructure, offering its citizens real alternatives to Trump's travel regime. And they're doing it with precision, partnerships, and regional unity. Grenada's new island access framework is a bold regional policy that includes mutual visa-free travel agreements with Antigua, Barbados, St. Lucia, and Trinidad, shared diplomatic services for Grenadian citizens who face U.S. visa complications abroad, a regional travel pass for business owners and artists to operate across borders. In effect, Grenada is working to build a mini Schengen zone in the Caribbean, so that Grenadians can move, work, and connect without depending on U.S. clearance. Grenada has also rolled out its new e-citizen ID card for nationals abroad, especially those affected by U.S. travel restrictions. This smart ID allows verified identity authentication for international banking and visa support, priority access to Caribbean embassies and legal clinics, access to regional aid and emergency travel services, even in U.S. territories. This innovation is already being tested in Canada and the UK, with full rollout expected by year's end. Grenada isn't just looking within the Caribbean, it's looking beyond the West. Kenya, Ghana, and Rwanda have agreed to begin talks on reciprocal work visa agreements. The United Arab Emirates is reportedly discussing tech sector visas for skilled Caribbean workers. Grenada is also in talks to join the African Union's Observer Program, aligning itself with post-colonial nations asserting economic independence. These aren't symbolic gestures. These are functional systems meant to create real options for Grenadians, students, entrepreneurs, artists, and digital nomads. Most notably, Grenada has called for CARICOM to form a permanent mobility council, which would negotiate as a single unit with U.S. and European visa authorities, pool resources for regional visa processing tech, develop shared standards for diplomatic pushback. If successful, this could redefine the region's geopolitical position, from passive recipients of policy to proactive builders of new rules. Grenada's bold legislative defiance has put the Trump administration in an uncomfortable spotlight, and the response has ranged from dismissive to defensive. At a campaign-style rally in Florida on July 3rd, Donald Trump addressed Grenada's actions directly. "If these tiny islands don't like our policies, that's fine, but they shouldn't expect our money, our markets, or our planes." He called the Caribbean Sovereignty and Mobility Act a PR stunt and warned that nations undermining U.S. border protocols would face consequences. Hours later, he posted on Truth Social, "Grenada? Never heard of it until they started complaining. If they want to trade with China and fly to Africa, good luck." The comments were widely condemned by Caribbean leaders as ignorant and disrespectful, especially given Grenada's long-standing U.S. ties and its participation in post-hurricane relief efforts for American citizens. Behind the scenes, U.S. consulates have begun taking steps that many see as quiet retaliation. Processing times for Grenadian visa applications have slowed by 30%, according to immigration lawyers in Barbados. Requests for diplomatic meetings from Grenadian officials have reportedly been delayed indefinitely. Funding from USAID for education and health initiatives in Grenada has been paused for budget review. Sources inside the State Department have anonymously expressed frustration. One official told Politico, "Grenada is being made an example of. It's not official policy, but it's certainly not a coincidence." Not everyone in Washington is on board with Trump's heavy-handed approach. The Congressional Black Caucus and several Democratic senators have issued letters in support of Grenada's right to autonomy. Senator Cory Booker wrote, "We cannot claim to support freedom and then penalize small nations for exercising it." There are growing calls for a Caribbean Policy Review Act, a bipartisan effort to re-examine how U.S. foreign policy engages with post-colonial states. Grenada may not have the world's largest GDP or army, but its defiance is exposing a deeper rift in how America handles diplomacy in the 21st century. For Grenadians and Caribbean nationals around the world, this isn't just about politics, it's about real consequences. The tug-of-war between Trump's U.S. and Grenada's new policies is already reshaping how ordinary people travel, work, and plan for the future. First, the obvious. Travel to the U.S. has become more complicated. Visa appointments for Grenadian nationals are now being scheduled up to 8 months in advance. The average total cost of a visitor visa application, including biometrics, interviews, and courier services, has ballooned to over $400 USD. Some families are choosing to apply through Canada or the UK instead, where processing times are shorter and refusal rates are lower. A recent study by the Caribbean Migration Observatory found that 62% of Grenadian applicants now consider alternate destinations for education or migration, up from 38% just 1 year ago. One of the hardest hit groups? Students. Some have lost scholarships after being denied visas due to insufficient evidence of return. Others are stuck in limbo, unable to enroll for fall 2025 because their US F1 visas remain under review. Families have begun exploring Caribbean-based degree programs partnered with European and African universities as a workaround. In response, Grenada's government launched an Emergency Education Mobility Fund to cover temporary costs for delayed students. The impact isn't just financial, it's emotional. Family members trying to attend weddings, funerals, or graduations are being denied or delayed entry to the US-based Grenadian immigrants fear traveling home for holidays, worried they'll face extra screening or re-entry refusal. Legal aid groups report a spike in Caribbean clients seeking help with visa appeals, ICE interviews, and family reunification delays. Meanwhile, diaspora communities in Brooklyn, Toronto, and London are rallying around their embassies, hosting legal clinics, calling representatives, and even launching awareness campaigns on TikTok and Instagram under the hashtag #GrenadaGlobal. In short, these aren't just policy debates, they're life disruptions. Grenadians are adjusting, resisting, and redefining their place in a global system that has long treated them as optional. Grenada's defiance of Donald Trump's executive order has become more than a national issue. It's a symbol of how small nations are redrawing the lines of global diplomacy. For decades, countries like Grenada have operated under the shadow of larger powers. Aid, migration, and trade terms have been dictated more often than negotiated. But 2025 may mark a turning point. Grenada is not just saying no, it's saying we have our own plan. By creating a sovereign mobility framework, a digital diaspora identity system, and new travel corridors through Africa and Latin America, Grenada is doing what many said was impossible, replacing dependency with diplomacy. This is a model for small states tired of arbitrary visa restrictions, former colonies reasserting independence in migration policy, youth-led governments finding bold new alliances in the global south, and it's working. Other nations, St. Kitts, Dominica, even Belize, are exploring similar strategies. Regional blocs like CARICOM and the African Union are watching closely. The message is clear. In a multipolar world, even the smallest voices can shift the narrative, if they speak with clarity and unity. So here's the bottom line. Grenada didn't protest, panic, or fold. It legislated, it united, it innovated. And in doing so, It may have just launched a new era of small nation sovereignty where size doesn't limit power and geography doesn't limit voice. Subscribe if you want more deep dives on the global power moves shaping your world. Like this video if you believe nations should define their own destiny, and share it with someone who still thinks diplomacy only flows one way. Grenada just stood up. And the world, it's paying attention.